Hello there, everybody. Welcome to our Purina Flock Talk. I'm Dr. Patrick Biggs, as you just saw that great introduction from me. So I want to thank everyone out there who's joining me today to learn about chickens. We're going to take a little journey on how to, create some tender chicken, how you can enjoy your time with your chickens. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, a lot of different topics. Hopefully, I'm going to answer, have answers for questions that you have. If I don't, or if you have more questions, pop those down in the comments section, and we'll try and get those to you during the broadcast. And if we don't, we'll certainly get you a response afterwards. So, let us know where you're watching from, how many chickens you have, how many chickens you're willing to admit that you have, and I want to take this opportunity. So I like to divide my chicken people, if you will, into two categories. I'm not going to say one is right or wrong, but there's certainly a different way that people kind of interact and kind of view their chickens from other people. So one is going to be my chicken owners, and these are people that kind of view your chickens as, livestock, source of eggs. They don't get too attached to them. If something happens to one, they're just like, all right, I guess I'll go get another one. So, there's certainly that kind of attachment to those chickens. But then there's my other group of people who are my chicken parents, who, you provide names to your birds. You certainly have a much different relationship with your chickens than maybe the chicken owners would, because, they're part of your family. You've given them names. You're really there for kind of the lifespan of the chicken. You want, the absolute best for the chickens. And not to say that chicken owners don't, but there's just a different level there. So, but I am going to say that as we go through this for my chicken parents, I'm going to point out a couple things that maybe you might be doing that necessarily isn't the greatest thing for your chickens. We'll get to those in a few minutes. But regardless of whether you kind of think of yourself as an owner or a parent, we're all here to talk about chickens. We're going to provide lots of information for it. So, hey, and if you want to admit to being a chicken owner or a chicken parent, go ahead and pop that in the comments section too. We'd love to see who is who. So let's get into this presentation. And here we go. Oh, but before we get started, a couple housekeeping things that I want to go over with you. So, this is a nationally broadcasted Flock Talk. It's going to be pretty similar to what you're going to see if you have a local Flock Talk at a dealer. But there's always going to be some differences going on. There's going to be different questions. You can see here up in the corner there, that was me at a Flock Talk, a while back when we were allowed to, socialize out in public. Go to your dealers, find out if they're doing a Flock Talk. A lot of the Flock Talks are still virtual, so they're going to be out there and maybe available. So talk to your dealers to see if they're having one. If you want to get to one that's maybe more local, where you can ask maybe some better questions, or feel a little bit more comfortable asking questions in there. One other thing that we're doing today, if you text Purina to 57682, you're going to be entered to win a Purina swag bag. And now I think you have to fill out it's a bit of a questionnaire you got to fill out to get that. It's going to ask you for a location. So I want you to put in Minnesota. Minnesota is the location. I don't care if you're in Texas or, Antarctica. Your location is going to be Minnesota for that specific, for the location of your Flock Talks to be entered to win that swag bag. And then also we're going to have some trivia questions throughout. We got 5 chances to win another Purina swag bag. So we're going to give that out. We're going to ask the question. You're going to post your comments or the answer in the comments section. And then the first person to answer is going to get that. I've got somebody behind the scenes for me kind of running that. And she's going to be letting me know when they've got winners, and we'll announce those winners during the broadcast. And like I said, questions in the comments. There's all sorts of fun stuff in there. So, all right, without further ado, let's wander into why we do this. There are all different reasons for why we raise chickens. Whether you're a chicken parent or a chicken owner, there's lots of reasons why. Obviously, eggs is why most of us get started in it, because eggs are a great source of nutrition. It's a fun way to kind of maybe interact with your children, get them to learn about where food comes from, and a lot of you may start out as chicken owners thinking, oh, chickens, okay, whatever. You get some chickens and you realize that they do have personalities. And that's how you progress from a chicken owner to a chicken parent, because you realize that they are much more than, I guess, without being offensive, dumb little animals. They're actually quite curious. People will spend hours just watching their chickens do whatever it is chickens do, because they interact. Some of them will be social with you. Some of them will kind of follow you around like a dog, and others will just be like, we can do without him or her. They don't really care. They're more like cats in that aspect. They're like, you feed me, I'll be okay to you, but I don't really care that you're there. So, just like everything, there's personalities that you're going to notice in your chickens, where some of them really care that you're there and others could really care less that you're there. So, there's all sorts of reasons we get into chickens, but whatever works best for you, find your reason why you have chickens and embrace that. All right, so like I said, we're going to cover a lot of things. We're going to start from the real basics, and then we're going to kind of progress into, what to feed them, how to care for them, and then maybe a little more advanced stuff towards the end. But like I said, if you have comments, have questions, post them in there, and we'll get those to it. So, like all living things, you've got to provide them with a place to stay. You've got shelter, you've got food, water, the basics. We've got to protect them against predators, and the weather. Right now, the weather is a big thing. So, these are all things that we need to do. You can provide those things to them, and they're going to actually do really well. So we're going to talk a lot of scary things in here. I'm going to warn you about some things that you might need to look out for. But in general, chickens are actually pretty easy to care for. Once you get them through those first few weeks of life, they're pretty good about taking care of themselves for the rest of the period. You provide them with that food, shelter, water, and protection from predators and the weather, and they're going to be around for a long time. They're actually pretty sturdy animals, but unfortunately, predators are a problem, and you're going to find that from time to time. You may have an issue with one, and then you may need to get with a veterinarian to kind of help assess what the problem is and try and help your chicken if she's been hurt in some way. And on this list, the veterinarian is really the hardest one of these to find. Now, more and more veterinarians are working with chickens now, just because there are a lot more people out there with chickens, and so that's kind of forcing the veterinarians to work with chickens. So, I always recommend to try and identify a veterinarian that's willing to work on your chickens to provide you some help if you get in a tight situation before you need it, because when your chicken's been attacked and she's, on the ground bleeding out, that's not the time to be going through the yellow pages or searching through your phone trying to figure out which veterinarian is going to actually help you with your chicken problem. That's not what we need. And then, obviously they're going to take a little bit of your time, and that's really up to you to how much time you want to spend with your chickens. It could be as short as 20 to 30 minutes a day if you're really efficient, and it could be all day long if you really want to spend a whole lot of time with your chickens. And then the last one on the list is some girlfriends. So, I like to say this: chickens are interesting creatures. They don't necessarily like to be alone, but they also don't like to be around other chickens. So when it comes to chickens, I recommend having no fewer than 3. So the pecking order is a real thing. And what that is, there's always a hen on top, and she's going to pick on everybody underneath her, and so on and so forth. So if you have one hen, she's kind of always lost, looking for her flock. She's kind of confused as where everybody goes. If you have 2 birds, you get one bird on top, one on bottom, and kind of the one on top is kind of always picking on the one on bottom, and that kind of stresses her out a little more. Having at least 3 birds, it kind of spreads out some of that aggression, and obviously having more and more birds can certainly limit that thing. So I say 3. That's 3. 3 birds is really kind of your minimum for that. So, all right, I see we've got lots of people chiming in on the chat, so it's great to see everybody in there. All right, that's great. Let's move on. Oh, let's see, I gotta get on. There we go. next one. So how much space, and this is really why chickens are quite popular, especially in urban areas, because chickens don't require a whole lot of space. You can get a decent amount of chickens in a fairly small space. 10 square feet per adult bird is really what we're saying. And we're gonna divide that up even further between kind of the coop area and the run. So the coop is gonna be kind of the structure, the building where the birds are gonna go at night, at sleep. That's where they're gonna go lay their eggs. So we want to keep that space actually relatively small, about 2 to 3 square feet in your coop per chicken. The idea is we keep it small, and that kind of keeps the birds from just deciding to hang out in there all the time. They're going to spend all of their time out in the run area where we're going to give them much more space. But keeping that coop small is actually pretty important for a couple of reasons. If we can keep it clean, and really right now when it's this cold outside, keeping that coop area small is actually really important, because the birds will create their body heat, will actually, generate heat in that coop area, and will actually raise the temperature in there and keep it warm enough for those birds to be okay in the middle of the night when it gets down to those minus temperatures. When it gets this brutally cold outside, keeping that coop nice and small helps that those birds will generate heat, warm that air up inside there, and that will help to keep them comfortable in there. It's not going to warm it up to 70 or 80 degrees, but it is going to warm it up enough so that they can tolerate some of these temperatures when we're at that 0 and minus degree weather. So having a big expansive coop looks nice, but it's not necessarily the best for your chickens. Do keep in mind though, chicken math is a thing. And so as you get a few chickens now, you may want to add more later. So keep in mind, how can you maybe expand that, contract it as your numbers move in and out. And then, like I said, if you want to give your birds lots of room to move around and explore, that's where you can go with your run area. That's the outside area. That's where the birds are going to spend most of the time. We're going to keep the food and the water out there. They can make as much mess out there. They're going to dig through the dirt, through the grass, whatever's on there. They're going to dig down in there, look for things. Give them lots of room out here. Just realize as you make that run area bigger and bigger, you have to work harder to keep it protected against predators. So that's, as that run gets bigger, it's more fencing, it's more wood, it's more everything, materials that you need to kind of enclose that area so that the birds are protected from things that are going to want to eat that. All right. Oh, it is quiz time. Here's our first quiz. So question number 1, remember, post those comments, those answers in the comment section. So your first question, what is the recommended space needed for 6 adult chickens? All right. This is the part where if I had Jeopardy music, I'd play it. But I don't think I have the rights to that, so I can't. So we will just sit here, give you a couple seconds to start posting those comments. Gotta do some math. All right, here we go. We got some questions coming in. Oh, I see some responses. All right, I see at least one correct answer in there. All right, so I'm gonna move on. So keep posting those comments, and then my behind the scenes person will let me know who the winner is. All right, let's move on. Next slide. Now, one thing that you may have encountered, there are some areas where chickens aren't necessarily allowed. So there are regulations. A lot of cities will classify them as livestock, and they don't necessarily like livestock inside the city limits. So some cities have it in place, have rules in place that limit how many chickens you can have. So I always encourage you to check your local ordinances to make sure that it is legal to have chickens. And if you live in an HOA or some sort of subdivision or a property owners association, you may want to check those, what those rules are in that subdivision, just to make sure that you're not in violation of that, because although the city may allow it, maybe where you live specifically in the city area doesn't necessarily allow it. Oh, I see we got a couple. Here we go. Rebecca S., Molly B., and Kathy L. You guys are the lucky winners of question number 1. So we will get in contact with you through Facebook to kind of get your information so that we can get your prizes sent to you. All right. So check with your local ordinances, do your work. Oftentimes the dealer where you buy your chickens from can be a good source of information as to what the rules are in your area, but do your due diligence, because we certainly don't want you to go through all of the hassle, the enjoyment of getting the birds, the chickens, and all the things that you need for it, and somebody showing up on the door and saying, you can't have those here. That's certainly not a situation that we want you to get into. So, just check the rules. And we have seen a lot of those places that have those kind of anti-chicken laws. Those are changing. And there's certainly, if you want to get those changed, you can go out on the internet. You can find lots of examples of people who've taken the time to kind of work with their communities to have them understand why, allowing chickens in an area can be a good thing. And then always make sure, do you need permits? Is there a specific number of chickens that you can have? Is there a limit? Do you need permits? Can you have a rooster? That can be a big thing. So if you live in the city, those are all things that you need to worry about. For those of you that live out in the rural areas, obviously you can just ignore that because you can do whatever you want. All right, let's move on. Where are we? Next slide. All right, so that was kind of the behind the scenes issues, the things that you need to know kind of really before you get started. So now we're going to assume you've got all that figured out, kind of got an idea of what you want to do. Now we're going to start talking about what it's going to take to raise those chickens. What do we need to do to keep those birds going, once we bring them home from the store? So, the things you're going to need: a brooder. That's where you're going to raise the birds, kind of their first home. You're going to have the things that you need: bedding material. You're going to have a heat source, something to control the temperature, thermometer, food, water. You got to protect them against, things that might want to play with the little chickens, and keeping the air flowing through there for those birds. So first things first, let's talk about the brooder. This is going to be your bird's home for probably the next up to maybe 6 weeks, depending on how you want to raise them. But at least for the first few weeks, this is where kind of an example of what you're going to raise your birds in. So notice this is a brooder area. It's kind of round in shape. We've got bedding material on the bottom, food and water spread out towards the outside of that brooder ring. We've got our heat source in a heat lamp there in the middle of that brooder area shining down. There's a thermometer there in the middle. You can see it that way. It's going to keep track of your temperature. Now, round is really the shape that we prefer, and especially if you have lots of chickens in there at one time. What happens is the chickens get spooked and they start to run. And if they run into a corner, they tend to stop. And if you have enough chickens, what happens is you get a pile of chickens. And it doesn't take very long for that bird on the bottom of the pile to suffocate, overheat, and potentially die, which is not something we want to do. So if we have this round brooder, what kind of happens is they get spooked and they just kind of keep running in a circle. So it's less problematic. Now, if you don't have something that's round, you do have a box or something with corners in it. You can always put things in there to kind of soften those corners up, some cardboard, maybe round it off so it's not quite a 90-degree angle. And that should eliminate most of those problems. So just keep that in mind, what those corners are, because we don't want any of that happening. The bedding material is great. We've got pine shavings are typically what is being used in that bedding material. A couple of inches deep, that's going to soak up most of the moisture, kind of keep the mess down. Your birds aren't going to get too messy. And then heat. Let's go to heat next. That's really a big thing. It's important that those birds stay nice and warm. So I always recommend that you get your brooder, all of the equipment you need for your brooder first before you get the chickens. Get it set up, get everything turned on so that room can start to warm up, because those birds, they're not great at controlling their own body temperature during that first week. So they like it nice and warm. So we want it to be 90 to 95 degrees in there for that first week. And then every week after that, you can start to lower that temperature about 5 degrees each week until the birds are around 6 weeks old. At that point, they're fully feathered. They can tolerate, colder temperatures. Now, the one big question that always comes up is, what do I use to keep the birds warm? Now, there are a couple of options out there. In the previous picture, you saw that heat lamp. It's a 250 watt bulb hanging in that dome. You just hang it over the top and puts out a bunch of heat, and the birds underneath it stay nice and warm. Now that is a 250 watt light bulb, and you're suspending it over a pile of wood shavings. So there's always a risk of fire, and inevitably every year, there are cases where something has gone wrong. That heat lamp has fallen into the bedding material and a fire has started. And so, at best, you just lose, the chickens that were in there. At worst, sometimes people are burning down their entire house for this. So you kind of have to decide what your level of risk is as to what you're using for a heat source. So the heat lamps are nice because they're inexpensive. They're cheap to get started. You're probably $25, $30 to get a heat lamp kind of set up, ready to go. But it is a 250 watt bulb. It does use quite a bit more electricity. And then there's always the risk of the fire. So if you're looking for something that might be a little more efficient, maybe, and certainly less risk of fire, these radiant style heaters that you see here at the bottom are really great. They're electric, so they plug in. What happens, that yellow plate there, that plate will heat up underneath it. So the birds can go underneath there, get warm, and then they can come out and do whatever it is they want. So, the chances of having a fire started from one of these is very small. So, and then those typically will raise up. So as the birds grow, you can raise them up higher and higher so that the birds can get underneath there. Now, like I said, heat lamps are pretty inexpensive to get started. $30 might be for to get started. These radiant style heaters are quite a bit more expensive. There might be $60 to $100 to even higher, depending on kind of how big you want it and maybe some of the accessories that come along with it. So, but certainly look into those, especially if you're worried about starting a fire. These are certainly your safer options for keeping your birds warm. All right. Look at all those people. Glad you guys joined us. All right. So keep your birds in that brooder area for about 6 weeks. As your birds get older, probably in that, if you do have that kind of shorter cardboard that we had in that first brooder, probably about 2 to 3 weeks is the max that your birds are going to be able to stay in there, because after that, they're going to be able to hop out, jump out, and fly out of there. So you might need to raise up those sides a little higher if you're doing something like that. But once those birds get to 6 weeks of age, that's when we can start thinking about moving them outdoors into a coop full time. So like I said, those birds are fully feathered. They can tolerate temperatures down into the 40s. We need to give them a little bit of an adjustment period from going from that nice warm environment into a colder temperature. But it takes them a couple days, just kind of like we need a few days to adjust to that colder temperature. The birds will certainly do that, but they can tolerate those cold temperatures because they're fully feathered. So take them out into the coop, show them the food, show them the water. Keep the nest boxes closed for now. They don't need the nest boxes until they're closer to 16 weeks old. So we can keep them closed. And that's going to keep the birds from kind of getting into the habit of going into the nest boxes and just kind of hanging out in there. We really want them to kind of use those nest boxes to go in, lay an egg, and then hop out and let the next bird in. So closing those off while they're still young and don't need them isn't going to hurt anything. So if your nest boxes don't have doors or anything, you can certainly put cardboard or some sort of block in there to keep the birds from getting in there. All right, and so moving to the outdoor coop. So 6 weeks was the number if your coop outside is empty. So if you have a brand new coop, no chickens in it, anytime from 6 weeks to about 16 weeks, from 6 weeks of age to 16 weeks is when you can start moving your birds out there, whatever you're comfortable with. Now, the problem is a lot of you are going to have birds that are already out there, and it becomes an issue. How do I get my young birds to integrate with my older birds? So if you already have chickens in your coop, I ask that you wait until your young birds are 16 weeks old before you start transitioning them out to live with your older hens. So I got 3 reasons for you. First off, we get to large chickens don't necessarily care for small chickens, and some of those larger chickens may choose to take it upon themselves to make sure that those younger birds, those smaller birds, aren't pestering them anymore, which usually results in the death of those chickens. So there can be some aggression between the larger and smaller birds. So we certainly don't want to invest 6 weeks into raising these birds and then throwing them out with chickens that are going to end up killing them. That's not something that we want to do. So, we wait till they're larger and then we can combine them. Disease transmission is always an issue. Your older birds have been around longer. They've been exposed to diseases. They may be carrying things that they don't show symptoms of anymore, but your young birds haven't been exposed to a whole lot yet. So as we move those young birds out there, they may be exposed to diseases that their immune system isn't ready to deal with, and that can cause problems. So, it's important that the birds are getting the nutrition that they need, and that nutrition is going towards growing those young birds. Now, if they have to deal with an immune challenge, that means the nutrition that they bring in to grow now has to go to fighting off this disease. So by keeping your birds separated until they're older, that helps to eliminate some of that problem. You let those young birds grow. At 16 weeks old, they're not growing nearly as much. Their immune systems are much more developed, and they can start dealing with some of those challenges. And then one of the bigger things is that your birds are going to be eating different feeds. Those young birds are going to be on their starter feed. Your older birds should be on a layer feed. We certainly don't want the young birds eating the layer feed. And if you want your laying hens to continue to lay eggs, them eating your starter feed isn't going to help that because the calcium level is not there for them. So it's always a challenge to feed different ages of birds, or feeding two groups of chickens different feeds when they're in the same environment. So by keeping them separate, that eliminates that problem of somebody eating the wrong feed. So those are things to consider when you have multiple ages in your flock. Leah is asking, what should I look for in a brooder? Well, brooders, for the most part, it's something that you're going to kind of create yourself. There aren't too many kind of brooder kits out there. I've seen some that are kind of plastic panels that you can kind of set up and make a round shape out of. Oftentimes people use kiddie pools. We were using cardboard, where we have a roll of cardboard and we can just spread it out. But I've seen people use like pack and plays, like baby things, or you can buy some kind of fold up collapsible brooders that you can use. I've seen that there. So if you get looking on the internet, you can find quite a few options that you might be able to get if you're not creative enough to kind of come up with one on your own. But basically, you just need something that can keep those birds contained in an area. And then oftentimes, I think I forgot to mention, we often raise those birds inside. Usually maybe in a garage. Sometimes people will raise them in a basement, because we do need to control that temperature a little bit more, because the birds aren't able to do that. We have to rely on that external heat source to do that. So if you're trying to raise your birds outside, especially now, in the middle of winter when it's, below freezing or at freezing, it's going to be very difficult to keep that environment controlled. So oftentimes we raise those birds indoors, where we have a little more control over what that environment is for those birds, so we can keep it at the temperature that they need, and hopefully keep them safe from predators. All right. I see we have, stock tanks. I see Steele here is commented he's using the stock tanks. So stock tanks are another great option for that. People will do that. So you might even look through the comments section here. They have water troughs, or another one Emily's got posted that work well. Water troughs tend to be kind of, oval in shape. So they're maybe long and narrow, but they're still, the ends are rounded. So there's lots of things. Rubbermaid totes or other things if you have a couple of chickens. So that might be something to get started for, the first few days, and then you can work into something bigger. So, all right, lots of good suggestions there in the comments section. And that is going to bring us to trivia question number 2. All right, put your thinking caps on, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. First response, post it in the comments section, and off we go. When should you move your young birds to an empty coop? Hopefully it's fresh in your brain. We just talked about this. And remember, that coop is empty. Yeah, there we go. Oh, look at that. We've got some answers rolling in. Look at all those. All right. So, yes, there we go. We got some good answers in there. All right, my behind-the-scenes person is going to tackle who is the winner for that one, and we will move forward. All right. All right. So that kind of gets us for the first kind of up to managing the chickens. I haven't talked a whole lot about what to feed those birds, but now let's kind of dive into what it takes to feed those chickens. So I know your birds are going to spend a lot of time on layer feed, but really the most important decision you're going to make in your chicken's life is what you feed it from day one. The starter feed is crucial to long-term success. So chickens grow extremely fast. Here we go. We've got Jane E, Annette B, and Cassie B for winning question number 2. Way to go. You guys are paying attention. You're on the top of things. So chickens grow extremely fast, especially your layer chickens. They're going to double in size during that first week. Within the first month, they're going to quadruple in size. So it's important that we get the right nutrition in them early on. We want to make sure that we're getting all of the nutrients that your birds need on a daily basis. Because, we want to grow them strong. We want long-term success. And I want you to be as successful as possible and, not have to worry so much about whether your birds are getting the right nutrition. So, when we put the feed together, when I formulate the diets for your chickens, there are all the nutrients that your birds need. They need 38 different nutrients on a daily basis to get from that little bitty chicken all the way up to that adult size bird. And they need that on a daily basis. And if they're not getting any one of those nutrients on a daily basis, then they're not growing at the right rate. And that's really what's important here. It's about getting your birds to grow at the proper pace, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Oftentimes, when we think of livestock animals, it's about getting them to a market weight as quickly as possible. It's getting them to grow as fast as possible. But with layer chickens, it's really it's the long game. We're in it for the long game. So it's important that they develop at that proper pace. Getting them to grow too fast is actually going to be detrimental for those chickens. I see we have Christy has a question. So Christy wants to know when to put chick grit out. Well, Christy, I would say never. Chick grit is not something that your chickens need. The feed is, so people used to put out chicken grit, or people put grit out because chickens don't have teeth, so they think that they need something to help break down the feed. And actually, so grit, what it does, the chickens have a gizzard inside their body, and that's really what digests or breaks down all of the feed for the birds. It kind of acts like what teeth would do. So it's a muscle inside the chicken where the feed comes in, and then that just grinds that feed together, and then that breaks it down. So it breaks all those particles down. So the chicken feed that your birds are eating, although it may be in crumbles or pellets, it's in larger pieces. That's actually a bunch of tiny particles that have been mashed together and held together with steam and pressure. So once that gets inside the chicken and starts getting wet, it starts to break down real fast, and then that chicken gizzard is going to grind it. And as that gizzard works more to grind that, it's a muscle. So as it has to work harder to break those feed things down, it's actually good for your chickens to have that gizzard working, because as that gizzard works, it actually controls kind of how things move back and forth in the chicken's digestive tract, and it kind of helps to improve the digestion. So, chicken grit isn't anything that your birds need. And if you have your birds on the ground, they're probably finding little bits of pebbles and rocks on the ground that they can eat. They'll pick up from time to time. So remember, chicken grit, there's no nutrition in grit. That's just, it's just gravel, it's just rock. So it's just something that they eat. It doesn't have any nutrition in there. So it's really not anything that your birds need. So we've actually stopped selling grit. Purina no longer sells a grit product because it's not necessary. So that's why I say you don't need it for your chickens. All right, good question. All right. All right, let's move on to the next one, because I was talking about getting your birds to grow at the right pace and feeding them properly from the very beginning, because we've got to build the foundation of that chicken. So here you can see this Polish chicken from, there's the first week all the way up until about 16 weeks of age. That's what she's going to look like as she grows. they grow so fast, and we got to make sure that they're getting the right nutrition so that they can support that body weight. Because you got to think about what you're asking this chicken to do. You want her to lay eggs. That's the equivalent of giving birth every day for 6 years of her life. So we need to make sure that her body is developed properly so that she can deal with kind of that stress of pushing an egg out of her body every day. If her bone structure isn't developing right, her muscles, her tendons, her ligaments, all of those things aren't developing properly, she's not going to be a great layer, and that's going to set her up for problems later in life. So it's important that we get these birds the right nutrition, and that's what we've tried to do with our Purina feeds, where we can start them with our Chick Strong system, getting them the proper nutrition from day one, and then as they progress up to around 18 weeks of age, when you make that transition to our layer feed, they can continue that by getting all the nutrition that they need when it comes to layer feed. But we're going to back up just a touch, and we are going to go over some details of the starter feed. All right. So starter feed, this is what you're going to feed your birds from day one. We've got 3 options for you to choose from. We have our kind of traditional feed, Purina Start and Grow. It's available in a medicated and a non-medicated form. And then we also have, for those of you that want to raise your birds organically, feed them organic feed, we have an organic starter grower, which is not going to have any medication in it. So those are your 3 options. Now, regardless of which one you choose, the nutrition is going to be the same. They're all 18% protein, the vitamins, the minerals, the amino acids, all 38 nutrients that your birds need on a daily basis are in each of those feeds in the right amount that they need each of those ingredients. So every bite they take, they're getting the nutrition that they need. So you're going to feed this whatever you choose from hatch to 18 weeks of age, and they're going to get the nutrition they need, whether it's a organic or our traditional feed. That's really for you to decide. I'm not here to tell you one's better than the other. You have to decide kind of what you and your chicken's journey is going to be, whether that's an organic or a more traditional route. Let's see. Oh, next slide. There we go. So I know I always get a question, medicated or non-medicated. How do you choose? Obviously, if you're going organic, you don't have an option. You're going to be non-medicated. But if you're going with our Start and Grow, you do have an option for medicated versus non-medicated. So, kind of how you decide really depends on whether your birds were vaccinated for coccidiosis. So you can talk to your dealer if you want. It's been my experience that dealers, stores that you're buying your chickens from, for the most part, they're not vaccinated for coccidiosis. They may be vaccinated for other things. Marek's disease is one that they're often vaccinated for, but they're not typically vaccinated for coccidiosis. So most of the birds that come in are going to be susceptible to coccidiosis, which is an internal parasite that the birds can pick up. It's a very common parasite that chickens can get. And in some cases it gets in their intestine, it lives in there, it causes internal damage to that. So they're not digesting and absorbing nutrients as well. They're not growing quite as well as we would like. So we add, our medicated feed has amprolium, which is not an antibiotic. So if you're concerned about that, none of our Purina poultry feeds have antibiotics in them. So it does have amprolium, and that's designed to keep those internal parasites from being able to reproduce and cause problems for your chickens. It's not going to make your chickens immune to coccidiosis, but it is going to keep most outbreaks of coccidiosis from causing a problem in your bird. So, and it's one of those things, if at any point that you have a problem with coccidiosis in your farm, on your property, you're always going to have problems with coccidiosis. It's a parasite that's very difficult to get rid of. It usually involves leaving the area empty of birds for years at a time, because that parasite lives in the soil, and then the birds will pick it up from the soil, they'll ingest the eggs, and then it'll start the process over and over again. So that medication is there really to keep those birds safe from that parasite. Now, oftentimes I will get people think that they can feed the medicated feed for maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks, and then the birds are safe. They can switch them over to the non-medicated feed. And really, that's not the case. The medication doesn't provide any sort of immunity to the parasite. So once you switch them from the medicated feed to a non-medicated feed, there's a chance that those birds can pick up that parasite and then show some challenges with that. So I say, once you choose to feed your birds medicated feed, continue to feed them the medicated feed until you make that transition to the layer feed. If you had started your birds on non-medicated feed and then you switch them to medicated, then keep feeding them medicated. And the medication will actually cause the parasite. If your birds had been vaccinated for coccidiosis and you start feeding them the medicated feed, you're actually going to kill that vaccine, and then the birds aren't going to get that benefit of the vaccine. So that's another reason why you need to, once you start feeding the medicated feed, keep feeding it until you switch them to the layer feed. They will develop immunity to the cocci problem once they reach adulthood, but at that point they're done growing, so their bodies aren't requiring as much nutrition to grow, and their immune systems are certainly more developed. So it takes about 4 weeks for your birds to develop immunity to coccidiosis once they've been exposed to it. All right, and then those birds, they eat a lot of feed. I know when you go to the store and you see those tiny little chickens, and when you can take a palm and hold 5 or 6 birds in one hand, and that salesperson at the store says, "Here's a 50-pound bag of feed," and you try to you kind of do one of these things like one of these doesn't go together. Those chickens are tiny little eating machines. Each one of those birds is going to eat between 15 and 20 pounds of feed in those first 18 weeks of life. So, if you want to go home with a small bag today, realize that in a few days you're going to be back buying a much larger bag of feed, because those chickens eat a lot of feed in a short period of time. So keep that in mind. And I think we are back to quiz time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, third question. Post those comments, those answers in there. Let's see, what's the quiz? What's the question? Here it is. Why should you choose to feed chicks Purina Start and Grow medicated? There you go. Think about that. Why would you want to feed them medicated starter feed? What are you trying to prevent? Oh, there we go. I see a correct answer. All right, well done. We just talked about it. You guys are paying attention. Makes me proud. All right, let's move on. We'll get the results in just a minute. So, that's the starter feed. It's going to bring us to 18 weeks of age when we need to start making that switch to layer feed. So we do have lots of options to provide you with. So hopefully we can find one that really kind of fits what you're trying to accomplish with your flock. We've got options. There are 6 options when it comes to layer feed that you have. And I'm going to go into details in those in the next slide, but realize that regardless of which layer feed you choose, your birds are going to get the same nutrition. It's, a layer feed, 16% protein, it's 3.5% calcium. Those are the key things that your birds need on a daily basis to be successful as layers. So here we go. Ashley G, William W, and Jessica S for getting number 3 correct. Well done. And I know there were a lot of others out there that got that answer correct, so good job, everybody. So, a layer feed. So we have our Laena. It comes in pellets and crumbles. We have our organic layer feed, also available in pellets and crumbles. And we have 2 Laena Plus products I'll talk about in the next slide. All of the feeds are non-medicated. All of them provide all of the nutrients that those adult birds need on a daily basis to lay eggs for the next several years of life. So, I guess everybody wants to treat their feed, and I'm going to talk about treats, but I want you to realize that, chickens don't view food the same way that people do. They don't have quite the emotional attachment to it that we do, but they don't necessarily care that they eat the same thing every day. What's important to them is that they get the nutrition today that will get them to tomorrow. And that's what the feed is there for. Now, we don't want to eat the same thing day in and day out. There may be some of you out there that don't mind that, but for the most part, humans don't like to do that. So we like to kind of transfer our emotions to our chickens. Now, chickens aren't going to view it like that. They want the nutrition that they need on a daily basis to keep them healthy, to keep them productive, and that's what the layer feed is going to do. It's going to make sure that those birds are going to be healthy, happy, and productive. If that was the only food that they got for their entire life, the starter feed and then the layer feed, they would be happy, they would be healthy, and they would be productive for their entire life. As we start feeding them other things, we actually start to cause problems for those chickens. And I'll get to those we'll talk about in another couple slides. Now, the other thing I want to point out on this slide is when it comes to roosters, oftentimes we keep our roosters in with our hens, and I want you to realize that layer feed for your roosters is not a great idea. We don't recommend that your roosters be fed layer feed. All that extra calcium in layer feed isn't good for him. He doesn't need that. Only birds that are laying eggs are going to need that high calcium. So it does get to be a challenge, like I mentioned earlier, feeding your roosters separately from your hens when they're kept in the same area. So the best solution I have for you is to offer flock raiser. That's what the rooster should be getting on a daily basis. If you have full-size chickens, a standard-sized chicken, the roosters tend to be a little taller than the hens. So what I like to do is we put a separate feeder, hang it maybe on the side of the run area, up just a little higher than what the layer feed is, so where the hens can't get to it, but he can still get to it, and he'll go eat out of that one. So hopefully, chickens will eat to meet nutrient requirements, and he's hopefully going to realize that layer feed is providing him with way too much calcium, and he doesn't need that much. So he should go look for something else. It's not a guarantee that he's going to do it, but having flock raiser in there for him to pick through that is a lower calcium feed is certainly better for him than forcing him to eat that high calcium layer feed all the time. So he has to get rid of that calcium, and that has to go through his kidneys. And as all of that calcium accumulates and goes through his kidneys, it starts to break down his kidneys and can lead to problems and will shorten his lifespan. So, I know there's not an ideal solution here if you're going to house your hens and your roosters together, feeding them separately, but we need to do what we can to at least make sure that he has the chance to eat feed that is right for him. Let's see what we got next. So now, I kind of talk about, overall the feeds are all the same from a nutritional standpoint. There are some slight differences in the feeds, and we're going to cover that right here. So, if you're not looking for anything fancy, you just want, what's good for your chickens. Organic isn't really, you're not concerned about that. Our tried and true Layina feed is certainly going to be, a great option for you. If you want to go down that organic path and have organic eggs, then we have our organic layer feed. And then if you're looking for a little more nutrition for yourself, we have a product, Layina Plus Omega-3, where we've incorporated flaxseed into that diet. And what that does is that flaxseed brings more omega-3 fatty acids into the chicken's diet, and then she'll take those omega-3 fatty acids and actually put those into the egg. And then when you eat the eggs, you get more omega-3 fatty acids in your own diet. And that's good for your own health. So it's a great way to have your chickens enjoy the company, the entertainment that they provide, and then also have them kind of making you healthier by improving the amount of omega-3 fatty acids in your diet. Now, you have to feed that feed to your birds for about 3 weeks, and that's going to kind of max out the omega-3 content in those eggs. You'll get about 250 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids in each egg coming out of those chickens. And just as a bit of comparison, most store-bought eggs or a bird that's only being fed Layina is only going to have about 50 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids. So this is really a great way to kind of improve your own nutrition through your chickens. And then our newest product that we have out there is Purina Layina Plus Free Range. And what this product is, we've incorporated black soldier fly larvae. So it's a new ingredient that's just been approved within the past year for use in chicken feed. So for those of you that want to incorporate more insect protein into your bird's diet, this is a great way to do that on a daily basis. Maybe you don't have a lot of area for your birds to free range. You don't feel like they get out enough and get to forage for bugs. So this is a way to provide them with some insect protein on a daily basis. Or maybe you're not comfortable letting your birds out to free range because you're concerned about predators or maybe there's a foot of snow on the ground, and there's just not a lot of bugs out there. So it kind of fills a need for if you think your birds need a little more insect protein in their diet, this is a great way to do it kind of on a year-round basis. And then all of our layer feeds have our oyster strong system in it. So I want to Christy, they are not going to hatch. They are dried black soldier fly larvae, and in the feed, the black soldier fly larvae are actually ground up into tiny pieces. So they are not going to hatch. You're not going to have bugs in your feed. At least the black soldier fly larvae are not going to be in your feed. So don't have to worry about any creepy crawly things in that feed with the black soldier fly larvae. So then I also want to talk about one thing I think that really separates Purina feeds from other products, which is our oyster strong system. And what this means is we've actually incorporated oyster shell right into the pellets, right into the crumbles of that feed. They're getting the oyster shell in there along with some extra vitamins, vitamin D, extra manganese to make those eggshells as strong as possible. So oyster shell is a great source of calcium for birds because it's a larger particle size, and what that does is it stays inside the bird's digestive tract longer. So we talked about the gizzard earlier with grit. So that's what happens. That larger particle stays in the gizzard longer, and as that gizzard grinds those chunks of oyster shell down, bits and pieces of calcium flake off, come into the digestive tract, and you have a more steady stream of calcium going into the body so that the bird can use that to make those eggshells as opposed to just relying on her body stores of calcium to do that. So this is a great way to keep those shells nice and strong. It also prevents you from having to go out and buy another bag of oyster shell to supplement your birds. So if you don't want to do that, that is certainly a way to go. All right, Annette has a question. She says she's showing Cerama chickens and would like to know if all the Purina varieties will produce good feather quality. She's adding flax and other ingredients to the feed. So no, Annette, I think you're really doing more work than you need to. So whether they're show birds or birds for just producing eggs, the feed is going to provide the nutrition that the birds need to be healthy and happy and to have good feathers. You could certainly, switching to the Purina Lana Plus is going to get more omega-3 fatty acids into their diet. So if you're really looking for that extra shine on their feathers, that is certainly the way to go. But so the thing about a complete feed is we formulated all of the ingredients that go in there. We've accounted for all of the nutrients in that feed so that we can make sure, if it's 16% protein or if it's a specific number of, vitamin A or manganese or copper or whatever that ingredient is, we've accounted for all of those ingredients, all of those nutrients in all of those ingredients so that as we mash it all together, that complete feed is providing all the nutrition that you need. Now, there's a reason why we have to take a wide variety of ingredients and mash them together to make a complete feed, because not every ingredient, there's no ingredient out there that has all of the nutrients in the right amounts for your chickens in one ingredient. So we pile all of those things together, but then as you start mixing other things in, you start to have kind of a negative impact on the nutrition. So we've designed the feed to be complete. So it provides all 38 different nutrients that your birds need. As you start adding other stuff, you start diluting things, and then that impacts the overall health of the bird for doing that. So we're trying to make this as simple as possible for you so that you don't have to focus on, making your chickens feed every day. You can just put the feed out there and know that she's getting the nutrition that she needs. Any complete layer feed should be doing that, whether it's Purina or whether it's another company. We hope that whoever's formulating those diets is formulating to meet all the nutrient requirements of those birds on a daily basis so that you don't have to go out and start adding things to your feed to make it better. All right. Here we go. Let's see. Where am I? I think I'm on to the next slide. Oh, here we go. It's trivia question number 4. Let's find out what the question is. At what age do most hens start laying eggs and need to be on a layer feed? Here we go. How old was it? In weeks. In weeks. Oh, there we go. I see some answers. They're popping up. There we go. All right. Great job, everybody. My behind-the-scenes person will get to those winners. We will move forward. So, we talked about feeding your birds the right feed and scratch grains and treats and supplements. People love to feed them to your chickens because we love to watch them hunt and peck and search and dig through the ground for those things. But remember what scratch grains are and all of those treats, mealworms included. They're like, it's like feeding candy to your chickens. It would be like me eating a bag of potato chips. There's a lot of calories, but there's not a lot of nutrition, and there's not a lot of complete nutrition when it comes to that. Think of, a layer feed in itself is 16% 16% protein, about 3.5% calcium, and then all of the other nutrients that your birds need on a daily basis. Scratch grains, 8 to 10% protein. Scratch grains have almost 0% calcium in them. The amount of calcium in scratch grains is almost negligible. So realize as you feed more and more of those scratch grains and those supplements, cracked corn to your chickens, you're actually reducing the amount of calcium that those birds are getting and the amount of calcium that they need on a daily basis to, lay eggs. So we like to limit the amount of scratch grains to about 10% of their daily intake. And that's going to be about 2 tablespoons of scratch grains per chicken per day. So we're going to keep that in mind. So I see we have some winners. Kelly C., Carlene B., and Shauna C. got question 4 correct, so well done. So this is where I'm going to talk to my chicken parents a little bit, because I know you guys are out there. You love to throw those handfuls of scratch grain to it because the birds come running. They're showing their love by doing that. But you're actually, you can do that, but you need to do it in moderation. So kind of keep it to that limit of 2 tablespoons per chicken per day. I know that's not a lot. You'll actually find that your birds will respond well if you were to throw out their regular feed. It's really, they respond. A lot of people put it in the can, they shake it. You're training the birds to come to that noise. So it's not necessarily that they like that. And if you're throwing it on the ground, birds, everyone likes to say birds are like tiny dinosaurs. That's exactly what they are. They respond to that movement. You throw something on the ground, that grabs their attention. They go looking for it. It's not so much that you're throwing cracked corn on the ground and that's what draws their attention to it. It's just the act of throwing something. That's really what drives their attention. So if you start to see or feel that maybe your egg production is suffering, maybe your eggshells are getting thinner, or you're seeing more breakage, think about how many treats that you're providing to your chickens. Are you over supplementing some of that and diluting the nutrition that they need on a daily basis to maintain that egg production? So if you start to feel like your birds aren't producing as well as they should, maybe cut back. Stop feeding them scratch grains for, a week and see if maybe you don't see a change in production. So you may be overdoing it. So it's okay to do those things, but we just need to make sure that we're doing things in moderation. All right. So, here we go. Yes, Marco's got a question. Should leafy greens also be considered as a treat less than 10%? So scratch grains, treats, supplements, a lot of table scraps, if you're using your chickens as kind of garbage disposals, if you will, that's fine to do. But remember, the more you feed of that stuff, the less of their feed. Remember that layer feed was designed to provide all of the nutrients that your birds need on a daily basis. So, it's about as perfect of a feed, if you'll allow me to say that, from a nutritional standpoint that your birds need to lay eggs every day. As you start adding other things to it, you start diluting that nutrition and adding other things. So that does include your leafy greens as well. I know it gets to be a challenge because as you let your birds out and forage and free range, we can't keep track of how much your birds are going to free range and forage for while they're out. So I always recommend, if you do let your birds forage, go out and free range, make sure that you have a complete feed for them there in the morning before they go out to kind of fill up on. And then after they've been out and they come back in, make sure that they also have that feed there so that they can kind of fill in any gaps that they may be missing nutritionally on what they could find. Because, we don't have a wide variety. Most of us aren't going to have an area or pasture, if you will, that is varied enough to provide all of the nutrition that your chickens are going to need to lay eggs on a daily basis. You kind of think back to when people were just letting chickens roam and free range. Birds will lay eggs for probably about 2 weeks. They have enough calcium built up in their bodies to kind of support egg production for 2 weeks at a time. They're going to lay all those eggs, and then they're going to sit on those eggs and hatch them out. And then maybe a few months later, after those birds are grown, they'll start another batch of eggs. But we're asking our chickens to lay eggs on a daily basis. It's almost kind of think of them like an Olympic athlete. You want them to perform at the top of their level. You have to provide them with the nutrition on a daily basis so that they can maintain that high level of production. If you don't mind your birds laying 12 to 20 eggs a year, then feed them whatever you want. But if you want to get eggs on a daily basis for years on end, you need to provide the body with the nutrition that it needs to support that production. So, feel free to supplement your birds, but just moderation. All right. What do we got next? Oh, there we go. All right, that takes us out of feed. We're in the home stretch here, just a few more slides to go. I want to touch on predators because for those of you out there that are brand new to chicken raising, you are going to have encounters with predators that you are certainly not going to appreciate. It's a rare occurrence where you don't have an issue with predators coming for your chickens to harass your chickens or even to remove chickens from your coop. So keep that in mind. There are lots of them out there. There are steps that we can take to keep those safe. You've got to make sure that coop is protected for your birds. A lot of people like to use chicken wire to kind of enclose those runs. And chicken wire isn't the greatest. Chicken wire is very soft. It's got a big opening. I've heard stories where raccoons will stick their paws through the chicken wire, or they pull on it enough where they can make the hole big enough where they can stick an arm in there, and they wait for a chicken to kind of wander by, and they grab hold of the chicken, and then they proceed to pull her through that chicken wire, which is not a pretty picture. So we like to recommend using hardware cloth, welded wire with small, about a ½ inch opening. That's going to keep most predators from getting in there. Anywhere that there's an opening in your coop, we want that welded wire hardware cloth on there. So if you have doors, windows with screens, anywhere there's a screen, also put some welded wire over that to help keep that out, because window screens are certainly not strong enough to keep a determined predator out of there. And understand that even if you do live in a city, there are predators out there. You may not see them because most of them are nocturnal, but they're out there, and if you put a buffet of chickens in your backyard, something is going to try to figure out how to eat them. And then when it comes to that cloth, bury that wire into the ground, about 6 inches deep, and then run it out parallel to the ground another 12 inches. That's going to help keep most of the predators that like to dig, that might try and dig under it, from getting at your birds as well. So, chances are you're going to have problems. When you do have an issue, it's always best to figure out where the predator got in, and then what steps do you need to do to keep a predator from getting in there through that same route again. And then finally, the aerial predators are certainly the hardest ones that we have to deal with, because especially if your birds are out free ranging, because they just kind of swoop in and they'll grab chickens as they're out wandering around, and they may be gone before you know it. So that's one of the harder ones to deal with. But some people will use, they won't let the birds go out unsupervised, or they may have a dog who will guard the chickens for you. Obviously you don't want a dog that's going to play with the chickens and hurt the chickens, but do what you can and learn. If you have mistakes, learn from those and try not to have repeat occurrences with that. All right, and that brings us to our last question. All right, you know the drill. There it is. What treats and supplements should baby chicks get? I'm not sure if I touched on this, but hopefully nutrition is very important for those young birds. We want to make sure that those birds are getting the right nutrition from day one. Does that include treats and supplements? All right. I see some right answers in there. Well done. All right. Let's move forward just to some kind of last minute things I want to talk about here. And this is kind of just safety information. I just want you to be aware of kind of biosecurity, sanitation, keeping yourself safe. And especially this is probably going to be more so for my chicken parents as you're loving your chickens. We're going to talk about some of those diseases that can be passed on. So, we want to limit the interaction of your chickens with wild birds. Wild birds carry diseases that can be passed to your chickens. Avian influenza is a big one. So limiting the wild birds from getting into your coop, into your run area is certainly something you want to do. Roof over the top of your coop is certainly going to be a big help to keep wild birds out of there. Realize that as you go and visit friends who have chickens of their own, you can transfer diseases from your coop to their chickens and vice versa. So, make sure that you're doing hand washing. You're not wearing clothes that maybe you were just walking through your coop in and then going to visit someone else's. And realize as those people come to your house, there's a possibility of transmitting disease. So I think right now we're all kind of aware of disease transmission. So it's kind of think about what you can do to make sure that your birds stay safe and you're not transmitting diseases from other groups of birds to your birds. Oh, here we go. Aaron P, Shannon C, and Ashley M getting the last trivia question correct. Good job, guys. And then we always want to make sure that we're limiting the spread of germs, so you can disinfect with that. I like to have a pair of boots or shoes that maybe you only wear while you're working with your chickens or in the coop, in the run area. Take steps to disinfect yourself, wash your hands. If you've been reading anything, there's been a big kind of upturn in the amount of salmonella poisoning in the past several years. The CDC has done some studies on it. They're attributing a lot of that to backyard chickens because people are more and more in contact with chickens, and chickens are natural carriers of salmonella. No matter how clean you keep your area, birds are just naturally going to carry salmonella. They're not going to show signs of it, but they can carry it and they can transmit it to you. So always make sure that you're washing hands with soap and water. If you've got young children in there, make sure that they're taking the right precautions so they're not doing anything. Our older generations need to be cared. People who are immunocompromised need to take precautions around chickens. I'm not trying to put the fear into you, but you just need to be aware that there is some risk that you can get salmonella poisoning and other kind of bacteria poisoning. So remember, especially my chicken parents, as you're holding your chickens, you're snuggling, you're kissing your chickens. They're not as clean as dogs and cats. These are animals that bathe in the ground, in their own manure. The dirt, the filth on the ground, that's what helps to keep the bacteria and the parasites down on the outside of their body. So they're not as clean as your dogs and cats. So keep that in mind as you're holding those birds and kissing those birds. All right. Let's see, next slide. So we're coming to the end. So I want to give you an idea of kind of your timeline of what to expect. Most chickens are going to start to lay eggs around 18 weeks, that in that 18 to 20 week range. They're going to continue to lay eggs for about 3 years. So those first 3 years of life, you're going to get lots of egg production out of those birds. You can assume about an egg a day once they start laying eggs. Keep in mind, however many eggs they lay in that first year, from 18 to about 70 weeks of age, that's going to be the most eggs that they ever lay in the span of a year. As they age, they produce less. There's nothing we can do about that. It's just Mother Nature at work. If she lays 300 eggs her first year, the next year she may lay 280, then 240, and so on until she's done laying eggs. All right, well, we'll talk to, Lori's got a question here. She wants to talk about cleaning the eggs and how soon after collecting. So Lori, that's a good question, and there's no good answer to it. So if you're going to clean your eggs, then those eggs need to go in the refrigerator. If you don't plan on refrigerating your eggs, you can keep eggs out at room temperature. Don't clean them. Whatever's on them, that's what it is. There's actually, as that egg comes out of your chicken, there's what's called the bloom. It's kind of a last coating that goes on the egg, and that's what keeps bacteria from being able to get inside the egg. So if you wash the eggs, you actually remove that protective barrier. So that cuticle is what allows us to leave eggs at room temperature and for them to not go bad. Now, as you leave them at room temperature, they are going to degrade faster. So, egg kept at room temperature may last 10 days, maybe 12 to maybe 2 weeks, depending on kind of, if you want that high yolk and that egg white that stays nice and tight. As that egg gets older, those things start to flatten out. So as that egg approaches about 2 weeks old, it's really getting to the end of kind of what I would consider a good quality egg. But if you're going to wash it, make sure you're washing it in water that is warmer than the egg. All right. So, and you don't need to use soap. So we want to use water warmer because those eggs come out of the chicken at room temperature or body temperature, which for a chicken is around 106 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. So as that egg cools, things on the outside can get drawn in. And if you're washing them in cold water, for instance, that can cause that stuff to shrink really fast and pull things in there because eggshells are porous. And so small particles, bacteria can get pulled through that as you cool off those eggs. So if you're going to wash your eggs, just wash them off with just water. You don't need to use soap. You're just going to scrub off any of the material that's on the outside. But once you wash them, you need to keep them in the refrigerator because they're going to be susceptible to bacteria. Whether you keep them in the refrigerator or on the table, that's a personal preference, but there are some steps you need to do to make sure that you stay safe and those eggs don't get full of bacteria and cause problems for you later on. All right, good question. So back to egg production. So like I said, first 3 years, you're going to get good egg production out of that. After that, from kind of years 4 to 6, egg production really tapers off. Now it's an egg every other day, every couple of days. By the time they get to about 6, it might be a couple of eggs a week is really what you're getting out of those birds. In that 6 to 7 year range, that's when most birds are going to go out of egg production. So, if you want to keep your egg production kind of where you've gotten comfortable with the amount of eggs that you're getting, about every 2 to 3 years, you need to think about restocking your flock and kind of bringing in new birds to kind of keep that egg production going. Because as those older birds go, they're going to provide you with fewer and fewer eggs. And then for my chicken parents out there, kind of what are you getting yourselves into? These birds, the average lifespan of a chicken is around 8 to 10 years. The world record, however, is 22 years. So if she's going to stop laying eggs in that 6 to 8 year range, and she might be around for another several years, you have to start thinking about what you're going to do with that bird. And for most of my chicken parents, that's not a problem because we just know we're keeping that chicken. She's staying with us until she's no longer with us. We're not kicking her to the curb or sticking her in the soup pot because she stopped laying eggs. That's just not an option for my chicken parents. Chicken owners, that's probably a much easier decision, but for my chicken parents, some of that keeping those birds around for a long time, just keep that in mind. They are going to be around for a while if they have a good, healthy life. And then obviously, right there at the end, I said a lot of scary things. We certainly want you to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Here at Purina, we're trying to make your job as simple as possible when it comes to the nutrition and what to feed those chickens, so that you don't have to come up with some sort of concoction to make sure that your birds are getting it. Because there's so many other things to enjoy of your chickens. You've got the eggs, you've got the relationship that you're going to develop with those birds, the teaching opportunity for children, so that you get lots of things. So enjoy that. And we want to make good chicken tenders out of all of our humans in this equation. That brings me towards the end. So we have lots of resources that you can go out. Obviously, your local Purina retailer. There's some web pages out there. You're on the Purina Poultry Facebook page, so you've already found us here. You should know that we've got lots of good information out here. You just sat through this talk, listened to me talk about chickens for, longer than I probably should have. We've got lots of guides out there. And then finally, I want to, for those of you that did not win a trivia question, here is your chance to enter to win. So we want you to text Purina to 57682. You're going to be entered to win a Purina swag bag. And then, like I said, you're going to get asked to fill out some information in there so they can get your information to send you the prize. And they're going to probably ask you your location of the Flock Talk. So make sure you put Minnesota in there, regardless of where you're at. For this one, it is going to be Minnesota. So get that in, get that posed, and we've got time for some questions. Oh, man, I talk way too much. Oh, Kelly, I'm glad you appreciated it. I see that. Do we have any questions that you would like answered? We've got about 10 minutes or so. Uh-oh. Jeanette says she's getting an error when she texts to that number. That's not good. I see Shannon here. I would claim her chickens as dependents if she could. There we go. That is a chicken parent. All right. Tips for extreme heat. All right, Kathy's got a question on extreme heat. We do what we can to keep as much air moving for those birds as possible. There's only so much you can do. Provide plenty of shade for your birds when it's really hot outside. Keep air moving, and make sure you keep air moving kind of down low where those chickens are. If you're going to install a fan, obviously make sure that that fan is protected in a way that the chickens can't get into the fan and ends up with an ugly situation. So, do that. Sometimes people will install those kind of spray misters to help kind of do some evaporative cooling with that. People have taken like water bottles, freeze the water bottle and sit that out in the coop, and the birds can sit on that. They'll kind of sit on that like as a way to kind of cool off. But keeping your birds cool in the heat is really a challenge. So, we do what we can to keep them cool, but there's only so much that we can do when it gets kind of that blazing summer heat. Yeah, see, I think Kathy there, she says she's using a mister system. Lori, that's right. That's the good question. Heard that eating scratch grains will warm the chickens as it digests. Is that true? Well, to some extent, just the fact that the birds are eating and digesting anything generates heat. We get this question a lot. There's a lot of myths about just, I got to feed extra cracked corn to my birds, or I got to feed oatmeal to my chickens, or extra scratch grains to my chickens when it gets cold out because they need that to stay warm. And that's really, actually, it's the furthest from the truth that it can be. The birds are going to be stressed because it's cold outside. They need the proper nutrition, and that's what layer feed, the complete layer feed, is there providing those birds. The fact that they're eating that food, you're going to see them eat more food. Most chickens are going to eat probably about a quarter pound of feed a day. During the winter, that might be a third of a pound of feed a day. They're going to eat more because they're using that feed to generate body heat. As they eat that, they just digest that stuff. So it's important, if we feed them a complete feed, that's really what's best for those birds, not feeding them scratch grains. Because like I said, as you feed them more and more scratch grains, you dilute the nutrition in the feed. So now they're stressed from the cold, and now they're also stressed because they're not getting the nutrition that they need on a daily basis. So it's best to just feed them less scratch grains during the cold months, and make sure that they're getting plenty of that food that they need, and make sure that they always have access to water. We don't want the water to freeze. That's the other thing you need to do. All right. Oh no, our number isn't working. All right, any more questions? I know we've only got a few more minutes left. What is the best special treat to feed your chickens? Well, if it's not Purina Scratch, you could go out and look. We do have a Purina Flock Block, which is an option that you can go. It's a 20-pound block of feed ingredients that have been kind of mashed together into this block. It's got some grains in there. It's got vitamins, minerals. It's a little more complete nutrition for your birds. That's going to provide them the nutrition. So it gives them something to do, to peck at. And it's it's a big block. It's hard. It takes them a while to break that. So that's something that you can certainly put out there for your birds to pick at and choose through. Oh, well, apparently my Minnesota option was bad info. I got bad intel. All right. Any more questions? Yeah, and just for those of you that have birds, I will comment on cold weather because we are in the midst of a cold snap right now. And, the best thing you do, like I said, plenty of food, make sure the water doesn't freeze. They always have access to water that isn't frozen. Put up tarps, keep the wind down so that that wind chill doesn't become a big impact. And make sure that they stay dry. Those are the biggest things that you can do. Because remember, those birds in general, Their body temperatures are 106 to 108 degrees. They're covered in a feather coat, a down coat, so they're well insulated when it's this cold. You know, we have birds here at Gray Summit at our farm. We've got 12 backyard coops that we raise chickens in. We don't do anything special when it gets cold out like this, and those birds manage to take care of themselves. You know, we keep them as dry as possible. We keep the wind cut down, make sure they always have food and water. That's really all you need to do. I certainly wouldn't recommend putting any heat sources out there for your birds, even when it gets down to that -degree weather. We've had some years where it got down to -20. We had our birds did just fine by doing those 4 basic things. All right. Yeah. So I know that's hard for my chicken parents to hear, because they don't want their birds to be cold, but those birds are designed to tolerate this cold weather. I mean, wild birds do it, and no one's out there taking care of them. You know, your chickens are going to be fine as long as you can keep them dry, out of the wind, lots of food, lots of water. All right. That is all I had. So if there is nothing else, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to spend with me. Lots of good questions. You know, if you have more questions, post them in the comment section. We'll try and get to them in the next couple of days if we need to. So again, thanks everybody. Get out, check to see if there's a local Flock Talk that maybe you can get to. Maybe get a little more information. You know, we talked chicken for almost 90 minutes. There's so much more we could have talked about. So, you know, get out there, do your research, and have fun with those chickens. All right. Thank you.